Imagine looking out your bedroom window right now. Instead of a quiet street, you are staring directly into the yellow, unblinking eye of a 9-ton Tyrannosaurus Rex. It isn't roaring for Hollywood cameras. It's casually sniffing your roof, looking for a snack. And you? You aren't some action hero with a rocket launcher. You are a hairless, shivering primate hiding under your bed, praying your hyperventilating doesn't give away your location. Before you roll your eyes and say, humans would have easily hunted them, you need to face a brutal, soul-crushing biological reality. If that 6-mile-wide cosmic wrecking ball had missed our planet 66 million years ago, your ancestors would have never left the dirt. You wouldn't be sitting in an air-conditioned room, sipping a latte, and scrolling through your phone. Your entire existence, every empire built, every technology created, is a cosmic fluke. Today, we are ripping up the cinematic delusion of Jurassic Park. We are looking at the terrifying evolutionary mathematics, the brutal metabolic traps, and the terrifying concept of an alternate timeline where reptiles developed high intelligence before we even got our first tooth. By the end of this video, you will realize that human intelligence wasn't some inevitable crowning achievement of nature. It was a freak accident that only happened because the real masters of the world were suddenly wiped off the board. To understand why humans never stood a chance, we have to completely erase the myth that dinosaurs were just big, dumb, slow-moving lizards waiting around for an asteroid to kill them. That is historical propaganda written by Mammals. Let's look at the raw timeline. The entire history of human civilization, from the invention of the wheel to sending rovers to Mars, has lasted roughly 10,000 years. The dinosaurs ruled this planet for over 150 million years. That is an absolute, iron-fisted monopoly on global ecology. They held a master key to every prime piece of real estate the planet had to offer. During the late Cretaceous period, the Earth was a hyper-efficient, highly competitive biological war zone. Dinosaurs weren't clumsy. They were peak organic engineering. Sauropods grew to the size of walking apartment complexes because their bones were structurally hollowed out like birds, combining maximum strength with minimum weight. Predators like the raptor family developed specialized switchblade-like claws on their feet that could puncture the thickest hides. More importantly, dinosaurs weren't cold-blooded in the way a modern turtle is. Recent bone chemistry analysis shows they possessed a high-performing intermediate metabolism known as mesothermy. This gave them the explosive speed and stamina of a warm-blooded mammal, combined with the low-energy maintenance costs of a reptile. They were cheaper to run and deadlier in the field. If you were a living organism 66 million years ago, the hierarchy was absolute. The dinosaurs were the landlords, the CEOs, and the undisputed heavyweight champions of the world. Every major ecological niche was occupied by an apex reptile that had spent millions of generations perfecting the art of staying at the top. There were simply no entry-level positions open for anyone else. So where were our direct ancestors while these giant reptilian tanks were dominating the globe? They were essentially the equivalent of modern-day sewer rats. Picture a tiny, bug-eating, nocturnal creature called Purgatorius. It weighed less than half a pound, lived in constant, absolute terror, and spent its entire life scurrying through the leaf litter in pitch-black darkness. This wasn't because mammals were inherently inferior. It was because the dinosaurs had constructed an impenetrable evolutionary glass ceiling. In biology, natural selection operates on a very simple rule. If a trait helps you survive right now, it gets passed on. If it gets you eaten, it dies with you. Imagine a population of these tiny Cretaceous mammals. Let's say a few individuals undergo a genetic mutation that causes them to grow larger, say the size of a modern dog. In a mammal-dominated world, that might be a great evolutionary step. But in the Cretaceous world? Congratulations, you are now too big to hide in a tiny tree hollow. but too slow to outrun a pack of juvenile tyrannosaurs. You have just turned yourself into a brightly colored, bite-sized appetizer. Natural selection didn't just discourage mammals from getting bigger. It ruthlessly executed any mammal that tried. This size restriction created a secondary, even more devastating trap. It locked mammals out of developing intelligence. Let's talk about the brutal economics of the brain. The human brain is an absurdly expensive luxury item. It represents only about 2% of our total body mass, but it greedily monopolizes over 20% of our daily caloric intake. It is a biological supercomputer that requires a massive, constant stream of high-quality fuel just to keep the lights on. When you are a tiny, half-pound mammal hiding in the mud, your entire day is a desperate mathematical equation. Find enough crickets to stay alive without becoming a snack for a passing lizard. You cannot afford to divert precious calories away from your muscles and senses to fuel a complex brain that thinks about philosophy or abstract strategy. If you stop to contemplate the meaning of the universe for even 3 seconds, a prehistoric predator will snap your neck. Evolution favors raw, immediate survival reflexes over intellectual processing power every single time. Mammals were stuck in an endless loop of evolutionary purgatory, forced to stay small, stay dumb, and stay terrified. But here is where the story takes a deeply unsettling twist. If the asteroid hadn't hit and the planet had remained stable, mammals wouldn't have been the ones to eventually develop high intelligence. The dinosaurs would have beaten us to it. Enter the Troodon. If you looked at a Troodon from a distance, you might just see another small, fast dinosaur. But up close, under the microscope of modern paleontology, this creature was an evolutionary warning sign. Pound for pound, Troodon had one of the highest encephalization quotients, meaning brain-to-body mass ratios, of any known dinosaur. Their brains weren't just big, they were wired for complexity. Troodon possessed large, forward-facing eyes, giving them exceptional stereoscopic three-dimensional vision, perfect for tracking moving targets in low light. They had highly advanced bird-like hearing, but the real kicker was their hands. They possessed semi-opposable fingers. They could grasp, rotate, and manipulate objects in their environment in a way that no other reptile could. In the 1980s, a legendary paleontologist named Dale Russell initiated a mind-blowing thought experiment. He asked a simple question. What would happen if you took a creature like Troodon and gave it another 60 million years of uninterrupted evolution? The result was a controversial model known as the Dinosauroid. Russell hypothesized that as these highly intelligent, tool-using predators continued to evolve, their brains would expand, forcing their posture to become completely upright to support the weight of a massive skull. Their tails, no longer needed for balance while running on 2 legs, would shrink and disappear. Their 3-fingered hands would become highly precise instruments for manufacturing complex tools. If this timeline had played out, the dominant civilization on Earth today wouldn't be human. It would be an advanced, highly organized society of reptilian humanoids. They would be the ones building cities, engineering plastics, and launching satellites into orbit. Think about that for a second. If a reptilian scientist in that alternate universe were to dig into the fossil layers of the Cretaceous period, they would find the bones of our tiny ancestors mixed in with ancient dirt. They would put those tiny mammal skulls under a microscope, chuckle to themselves, and write a scientific paper about how these primitive, furry little pests were an evolutionary dead end, completely incapable of adapting to a complex world. We wouldn't even be a footnote. We would be the prehistoric equivalent of a cockroach. The only reason that reptilian empire doesn't exist is because 66 million years ago, the universe looked down at Earth's stale, reptile-dominated leaderboard and decided to completely flip the table. The Chicxulub impact was not just a bad thunderstorm. It was a literal planetary reset button. When that 6-mile-wide mountain of rock slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, it hit with the force of 100 trillion tons of TNT. It punched a hole straight through the Earth's crust, ejecting billions of tons of vaporized rock and sulfur into the upper atmosphere. Within minutes, global temperatures plummeted as a thick, toxic shroud of ash completely blocked out the sun. The planet entered a state of prolonged, catastrophic nuclear winter. Photosynthesis ground to a screeching halt. The plants died. The massive herbivorous dinosaurs, which required hundreds of pounds of vegetation every single day just to stay alive, starved to death within weeks. Once the giant herbivores vanished, the apex predators, the tyrannosaurs, the monsters that had ruled the food chain for eons, found themselves standing in an empty, frozen wasteland with absolutely nothing left to hunt. This is where the evolutionary math completely reversed its logic. For 150 million years, being big, dominant, and specialized was the ultimate cheat code for winning at life. But in the dark, frozen aftermath of the impact, those exact traits became an immediate death sentence. Who survived? The losers, the outcasts, the tiny, pathetic mammals that had spent millions of years mastering the art of living on garbage and hiding in holes. Because our ancestors were small, they didn't need hundreds of pounds of food a day. A single dead beetle or a patch of rotting fungus was a feast that could sustain them for a week. Because they were burrowers, they were shielded from the initial, searing heat wave of the impact and the freezing surface temperatures that followed. The asteroid didn't select for the strongest, the smartest, or the most dominant species. It selected for the most survival-hardened scavengers. It was a brutal, indiscriminate filter that wiped out 75% of all living things on Earth, specifically targeting the giant reptilian ceiling that had kept mammals suppressed for eons. When the skies finally cleared millions of years later, the world was a ghost town. But for the first time in history, the landlords were gone. The evolutionary glass ceiling had been completely shattered into dust. With the dinosaurs removed from the equation, the empty ecosystems of the world became a blank canvas. Those tiny, terrified mammals crawled out of their muddy holes, looked around at the vacant forests and empty plains, and did something they had never been allowed to do before. They grew. They occupied the forests, developed larger bodies, adapted to daylight, climbed into the trees, perfected their vision, evolved opposable thumbs, and eventually stood up on two legs. Every single milestone of human progress, from the discovery of fire to the splitting of the atom, was built directly on top of that massive prehistoric graveyard. We like to look at ourselves in our mirrors, proud of our advanced brains, our complex languages, and our architectural marvels, convinced that we are the natural, rightful masters of this planet. But the unvarnished truth is that we didn't outsmart the dinosaurs. We didn't conquer them in a glorious war of intelligence versus brawn. We just inherited their empty house because they got blindsided by a cosmic semi-truck. Our existence is not a guarantee. It is a profound, terrifyingly fragile miracle, born from pure, chaotic luck. So the next time you are sitting in a park and a common pigeon lands near your bench, and it tilts its head, staring at you with that cold, unblinking, ancient eye, don't just dismiss it as a nuisance. Look closer. That bird is a literal, direct descendant of the theropod dinosaurs. It carries the genetic legacy of the monsters that used to hunt our ancestors through the primordial dark. Give it a piece of your sandwich. Respect the lineage. Because somewhere out there, in an alternate, unhit timeline, a 6-foot-tall reptilian humanoid is sitting in a high-tech auditorium, lecturing a class about a strange, hairless, extinct mammal that never stood a chance. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive into the dark math of our existence. If you enjoyed this journey into what could have been, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you woke up tomorrow and dinosaurs were suddenly restored to the modern world, How many days do you honestly think human civilization would last before collapsing? Take care of yourselves, stay humble, and see you in the next one.